Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and it is Friday, March 18th, 2011. Before we get into the emergencies around the world, let me just call your attention to a major essay which I have posted at tarpley.net. Behind the wave of destabilizations, a desperate bid by the CIA, by Anglo-American imperialism, to prevent a mass exodus of satraps and viceroys, many countries eager to leave the Anglo-American sphere and gravitate towards Russia, China, India, Brazil, or go on their own, like Turkey. And the whole idea of what we're seeing now, starting with WikiLeaks, is a cynically planned CIA campaign of destabilizations with the help of MI6 and others. I'm sure the French, the SDEC, and the DGSE, and so forth, up to their necks. The goal of this is to destroy the modern nation state itself. That's the goal. And if you have been recruited as a foot soldier to this stuff, you better step back. The goal is to destroy nation states. So far this year, we've got 3 nation states on the road to being smashed up and partitioned. That, of course, would be Sudan, carved into 2 parts, a cynical maneuver to get control of the oil in southern Sudan. Yemen, as of this morning, on its way to a north-south split in Yemen. Libya now, the UN intervening really to enforce a east-west division of Libya. And, of course, the precursor of that, in the spring of 2008, we had the secession of Kosovo under NATO auspices. So NATO is becoming the engine of destroying the modern state. And the goal of this, of course, is the overarching imperialist construction: NATO, the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, the private central banks, and then a series of balkanized petty states, perfectly impotent, perfectly incapable of resisting a large multinational, squabbling among themselves, and so forth. And that, of course, is a very dark future for humanity. That is a new dark age right there. So it's time to take a stand in favor of the nation state, whatever the defects of it are, and they're glaring. They are better than that's a better alternative than the chaos and collapse of civilization, which is what the Anglo-Americans are pushing. The other thing I want you to remember is keep up with these events hour by hour, really, on Twitter, Webster G. Tarpley, WEBSTERGTARPLEY, Webster Tarpley on Twitter, and you can keep up with this stuff. Go and take a look. I think I've amassed a certain track record now in the last couple of months that the Twitter feed has been going. But now let's take a look at the high crimes, the new crimes coming from the UN Security Council. As of yesterday evening at about 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the UN Security Council has voted 10-0 with 5 abstentions for a no-fly zone over Libya, but not just a no-fly zone. It is carte blanche. It is a blank check for imperialist and colonialist assaults, including airstrikes, including Predator drones, including cruise missiles, including the entire panoply of lethal hardware, which the Anglo-Americans and their French puppets have amassed, and that is now going to be turned loose on Libya. And you look at those characters in Benghazi celebrating, do they realize that they'll soon be joining the Pakistanis with Predator drones in their skies, that they will be murdered from above? We've just had 8 boys gathering firewood killed in Afghanistan. We've just had some 30 or 40 people killed in Pakistan by these lawless Predator drone attacks. Welcome Libya to the club. And if you want to know your future, it's easy. Look at the genocide, look at the rubble of Iraq, of Afghanistan, of Pakistan. That's where you're headed now, thanks to your rebellion. And, of course, Gaddafi, not very pretty, but the destruction in Iraq with 1.5 million dead at U.S. auspices. Not pretty at all, even uglier than whatever Gaddafi has done, which can't come close to that. Now, the question that we face is, what do you do in the United Nations when a majority of the Permanent Five are willing to violate the Charter? Because that's what this is. It is a flagrant violation of the UN Charter. All necessary means to protect civilians. It is, first of all, breathtaking that they were able to get the all necessary means, because that means anything. Now, they are also telling us that they are ruling out a direct land invasion, but this is inherently unlikely, because to the extent that you have these air attacks in the no-fly zone, what happens if that fails to defend the puppet state in Benghazi, which is what the resolution specifically mentions? In other words, they want this enclave around Benghazi to be a privileged zone where these rebels can run wild. Notice, the rebels, although they are an armed force, right, they are an irregular army, the rebels are described as civilians who are the victims of a unilateral violence on the part of the Gaddafi armed forces. This simply is not reality. The rebels are a fighting force, and indeed, from the internal perspective, they're the aggressors. In other words, they're the ones who started the fighting and the civil war. This was not an initiative from Gaddafi. So Gaddafi is fighting back, and now the Security Council comes along and says, this is inadmissible. You're an aggressor on your own territory. Well, you can't be an aggressor on your own territory, according to the United Nations Charter. The most serious thing, Chapter 7 measures. Chapter 7 of the UN Charter is the heading under which these international military operations are conducted, right, going back to, say, the first Gulf War. The only reason you're allowed to engage in an attack on a UN member state is for the restoration of international peace and security. International peace and security. Now, it's clear that Libya and the events in Libya at no time, in no way, ever represented a threat to international peace and security. It had no ramification outside of the borders of Libya. It was not a threat to Tunisia or Egypt or the Mediterranean or Chad or Algeria or Sudan or the other countries that share borders with Libya. There's no dimension of threat to international peace and security. Instead, what we have here is an interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state, which is explicitly banned by the UN Charter. The internal affairs of sovereign states are, ipso facto, by definition, not the purview of the UN Security Council, unless you can argue in some way that they represent a threat to international peace and security. That has not been done. From the strictly U.S. point of view, we can say, in the case of Libya, unlike, say, Iraq in the early 90s or Iraq in 2003, there is no way you can argue that Libya has engaged in any act of war against the United States. Libya has done absolutely zero to the United States, at least in the time frame that we're dealing with, the last 4 or 5 years. They've actually had good relations with Libya since Gaddafi agreed to take down whatever nuclear research or nuclear research reactors he had. They've been palling around with Gaddafi to some degree. And, of course, these are the mechanisms by which Gaddafi stays in power, right? You don't stay in power for 41 years unless you're willing to make dirty deals from time to time to stay in power. But the idea that Libya has somehow engaged in aggression against the United States, there's not even a theory for this. There's not even a theory that he can do it in 45 minutes or he might get his hands on this or that and then attack the U.S. This was never present. So the decision of the UN Security Council is illegal under the Charter. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.